Welcome to the Bill Moran Show on WVLP LP 103.1 FM and streaming live at WVLP.org or on your TuneIn app. We are broadcasting live from the historic 1 Center Street building in beautiful Valparaiso, Indiana. The Bill Moran Show is underwritten by Recovery Works of Maryville, Indiana. And now, here is your host, Bill Moran.
Hello, this is Bill Moran, welcoming you to the first in a series of panel discussions on sexual aggression, abuse, and rape titled Crimes in the Shadows. We've had panel discussions in the past on domestic violence with Sheriff David Reynolds, Mary Beth Schultz, and Brianne Coleman. During those discussions, we were not only shocked at the numbers, but also the volatile nature of a domestic dispute. Just recently, a Colorado sheriff's deputy was killed and 4 others injured as they responded to a domestic violence call. Many law enforcement officials will agree that a domestic dispute is one of the most dangerous situations for them to respond to. From there, the news has been full of men and women finally standing up to their sexual aggressors and abusers. Daily, we see yet another celebrity, elected official, or other prominent member of our society being charged or accused of a sexual misconduct or crime. Today, our panelists consist of our moderator, Brianne Coleman, who is the CEO of Dimensions of Intersections, a non-for-profit that provides support services to survivors of domestic violence or sexual aggression. And, of course, we have 3 women who are here to share their experiences. We must warn you that the following discussions will be graphic in nature as the panelists tell about their personal experiences. So, parental discretion is definitely advised on this one. Now, I will turn it over to our moderator, Brianne Coleman.
Thank you, Bill. This is Brianne Coleman. I know that I have shared a couple conversations with you guys on some other YouTube videos, and so we just wanted to kind of continue our conversation that we had prior. And so I wanted to start off with some domestic violence statistics as well as some sexual assault, stalking, sexual harassment, and just kind of touch base on some of the things that we talked about prior. So first of all, I'd like to define domestic violence. It has a wide range of definitions, and so I want to make sure that we're very clear on what it is. Domestic violence is the willful intimidation, physical assault, battery, sexual assault, and or other abusive behaviors as part of a systematic pattern of power and control perpetrated by one intimate partner against another. It includes physical violence, sexual violence, threats, and emotional and psychological abuse. The frequency and severity of domestic violence varies dramatically, and you'll learn more about that as we share some stories from other survivors. A couple other key statistics I wanted to share. In the United States, an average of 20 people are physically abused by intimate partners every minute. This equates to more than 10 million abuse victims every year. 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men have been physically abused by an intimate partner. 1 in 5 men and 1 in 7 men have been severely physically abused by an intimate partner. And 1 in 7 women and 1 in 18 men have been stalked. Stalking causes the target to fear he or she or someone close to him or her will be harmed or killed. On a typical day, domestic violence hotlines nationwide receive approximately 20,800 calls. The presence of a gun in a domestic violence situation increases the risk of homicide by 500%. Intimate partner violence accounts for 15% of all violent crime. Intimate partner violence is most common among women between the ages of 18 and 24. And 19% of intimate partner violence does involve some form of weapon, whether it be a knife, a gun, or household objects too, as you'll learn in some of the stories that we share a little bit later on in this podcast. A couple other things. Sexual assault obviously plays directly into domestic violence. 1 in 5 women and 1 in 59 men in the United States is raped during his or her lifetime. A startling statistic is 9.4% of women in the United States have been raped by someone that they're intimately involved with. So that happens, right? Just because you're in a relationship with somebody does not mean that it gives them permission to take you. So I want that to be very, very felt and well known. Stalking, 19.3 million women and 5.1 million men in the United States have been stalked. You'll also hear from one of our survivors about an instance where she was kind of stalked. 66.2% of female stalking victims reported stalking by a current or former intimate partner. Again, these are just things that I want everybody to know and be aware of so that you know that this could be happening in your own backyard. As far as homicide goes, homicide and domestic violence play hand in hand often. 1 in 3 female murder victims and 1 in 20 male murder victims are killed by intimate partners. A study of intimate partner homicides found 20% of victims were family members or friends of the abused partner, neighbors, persons who intervened, law enforcement responders, or bystanders. 72% of all murder-suicides are perpetrated by intimate partners, and 94% of murder-suicide victims are female. I've had the pleasure of knowing a lot of women who I am happy to call survivor sisters, and gun violence is something that has become very much the norm when it comes to domestic violence. So again, we need to talk about that and talk about how victims can negatively impact victims and survivors of domestic violence as well. A couple more statistics I'll share with you. There are both economic effects and physical and mental health effects. Victims of intimate partner violence are at an increased risk of contracting HIV or other STDs due to forced intercourse and or prolonged exposure to stress. Intimate partner victimization is correlated with a higher rate of depression and suicidal behavior, and only 34% of people who are injured by intimate partners receive medical care for their injuries. Again, domestic violence has become one of those things that is just a norm. And so a lot of people don't realize that what's happening to them is wrong. And we need to make sure that we are telling women and men who are affected that you deserve the care, deserve justice, and we want to make sure that that 34% is increased. And if you are affected by domestic violence, go get help. Go see a doctor, make sure you're okay. Some economic effects. Victims of intimate partner violence lose a total of 8 million days of paid work each year. 8 million days of paid work each year are missed out by victims of intimate partner violence. That's the equivalent of 32,000 full-time jobs. Intimate partner violence is estimated to cost the U.S. economy between $5.8 billion and $12.6 billion annually, which is up to 0.125% of the national gross domestic product. Between 21 and 60% of victims of intimate partner violence lose their jobs due to reasons stemming from abuse. Between 2003 and 2008, 142 women were murdered in their workplace by a former or current intimate partner. This amounts to a total of 22% of workplace homicides among women. So these are just a few statistics that were provided by the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence. Just another way for us to educate and teach and let you guys know that this is such a widespread problem that it needs to be addressed on a much grander scale. So what I'd like to do now is introduce the ladies that are here at the table with me. So first we have Vicki. Vicki's 34. She's a home health care provider. She also owns a comedian management company. She was first exposed to domestic violence by an intimate partner in 2003. And as she'll share about some early traumas that she had that kind of played a part into how she got involved in an abusive relationship. We also have Mishka here. Mishka's 37. She works as a case manager for Crown Counseling, and she owns 2 daycares, trying to make sure that kids are safe and have a safe place to go so that the parents can work. Appreciate Mishka for her work in that area as well. And she'll share that her abuse started in March of 2011. Obviously, if you've listened to my prior interviews, you know a little bit about me. I'm Brianne. I'm 37. My abuse started with with my son's father in 2002 and went on for a few years. But my early childhood trauma started very, very young. There's a wide range of diversity in the domestic violence and the things that we've all experienced. And so I'm looking forward to letting them share their stories with you. Also, we do have Callie here, and Callie will be more than happy to share her story. So you'll learn a little bit more about what she's been through as well. So with that being said, I want to talk about a couple more things real quick before we get into the stories and sharing those. As we talked before, the Me Too movement it's actually a 10-year movement. It's been going on for 10 years, but it didn't really get the steam that it needed to hit on a national and international platform until a couple months ago when Alyssa Milano came out with the hashtag Me Too movement on both Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. What this was her way of ousting her abuser. And abuse doesn't just have to be physical or mental. It can also be sexual harassment. It can be sexual assault. It can be inappropriate touching. It could be anything. Any time when a woman feels like she's being violated, that is absolutely a sign that something is wrong, right? And we as survivors and at the time victims, we need to be open and comfortable enough to talk about it and not be ashamed. Nothing that any of us have done wrong. There's nothing that any of you who are listening have done wrong. If you have a story to share, I encourage you to reach out and share those stories and talk about it. It feels really good to get it off your chest, and trust me, you're not alone. Just like Alyssa Milano did with the movement, the celebrity impact that it had was insane. Not just because you're hearing all these victims coming out, but you're hearing all of these people who are in power and notoriety being ousted for what they've done. And we talked previously about some of the celebrities that have been ousted during all of this, and it's terribly frightening, the seeing, so it started off, obviously the biggest thing was Harvey Weinstein, him being ousted. Right now, it's well over this number, but so far they have 80 accusers who have identified themselves and come out against Harvey Weinstein. That is a huge deal. That is a startling number. And so, number one, we pray for all of those who've been affected by this, but also we encourage you to continue to be open and transparent about your stories and how far you've come. So that's a big deal. So I'm just going to go through a couple of celebrities. I know we talked about this before, but I don't think we can ever talk about it too much. So I'll just start with the top of my list here. So it just says, since Weinstein, here's a growing list of men accused of sexual misconduct. Charles Dutoit, he's 81. He's the world-renowned artistic director and principal conductor of London's Royal Philharmonic Orchestra. He's got 4 accusers who've come out. Morgan Spurlock, he's a director, and he has a couple of victims have come out on him. Tavis Smiley, his accusers there's multiple. And then NFL. You got NFL Network analysts, you got Marshall Faulk, you got Ike Taylor, and you got Heath Evans. Each of them have at least one person who has accused them. This doesn't just stay in just, acting or directing. This goes on to athlete. Got Roethlisberger from the Steelers. So you got him who's been countless times accused and never seems to have any punishment associated with him. And so that's another thing, you got people in notoriety and positions of power where they think they can get away with these things. And they pay them off, and there's this hush money that these users pay just to not have their story ousted. But that Me Too movement really pushed everybody to start calling them out and saying what they need to do, and that's a big deal. You got celebrity chefs, you got you got Matt Lauer. Obviously, that was a big one. I think a lot of people kind of were a little stunned, even though we knew. I think it was still a shock to have it out. And there's been multiple accusers. And when they put multiple, that doesn't mean that there's 5. That means that there's probably more than 10, is what I'm going to guess. You got Charlie Rose. And I know for Bill, he looked up to Charlie, and that was his mentor and somebody that he admired. And right now his accusers are up to 9. That's a big deal. Then you have a couple others here. Russell Simmons, I know we talked about him on the last show, multiple accusers. And he was good enough to kind of take ownership right out the gate. He didn't wait for somebody to kick him out of his spot over at Def Jam, but what he did do was take ownership, but still the damage is done. And how many people has he really affected in a negative way? Jeffrey Tambor, another actor. Senator Al Franken, multiple accusers. So I just want you guys to know that this just stretches so far and wide. It happens in our homes and in the projects. It happens in upper class communities where people are living in $1 million homes, and it happens at work, and it happens right underneath our nose and all the time. So we really just need to find our voices and be okay with saying, hey, me too. I was affected by sexual harassment or sexual assault or any kind of crime against women and or men. Some men have come out on the Me Too movement too, which I think is fantastic. So we just need to continue to use our voices and not be afraid to do that. So with that being said, I'd like to introduce Mishka. She will be sharing her story and telling a little bit about what she's been through and how she's overcome. Mishka?
Good evening. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Okay, just to touch bases in the beginning, when I first had an incident with domestic violence, he was or is my oldest son's biological father. My son does not have any type of interaction with him. He does not know him. My current husband has been in his life since he was 2, and that's who he knows as his dad or father. But the first incident happened in March of 2011. And we had went back and forth several times about just the cheating. And at that point, I was just kind of tired of it. We had took a year off when I first had my son because of the cheating again. Then we tried to work on our relationship. And, of course, I found out like a year into us being back together that he was again cheating. So at this point, I was just done. So I had texted him, you know, I'm over it. Let's just, you know, co-parent and do what we need to do for our son. At that point, he came out to my home. He lives in Illinois, or at the time he lived in Illinois. I live in Gary. We never lived together, so that was a blessing in the situation within itself, too, because I feel like it probably would have came about a lot sooner if we had lived together. But it was a little bit of verbal. You know, of course, when we would get into arguments on the phone, it was always, you know, I'm a bitch and this, that, and the other, and just talking derogatory to me. So there was some verbal abuse, you know, here and there. But back to the incident that night, he came out to talk, to try to, you know, talk me out of breaking up and everything. One thing led to another as we're sitting there talking. He noticed that I had changed my status on Facebook. So that really made him mad because I had put that I was single since I had broke up with him. And that was his focus. Why would I change my status, which I didn't even know. He didn't even have a Facebook. I don't know how he saw my Facebook or anything like that. So moving along, we're sitting in the living room discussing, you know, I couldn't be with you. I'm not going to be with you. Next thing you know, I'm being choked on my couch to the point where I felt like I was going to pass out. I was hit a few times in my face, and that sparked me to kind of, okay, well, I got to clean my face up, you know, because it was off and on. 1 minute he's choking me, next thing he's hitting me because I'm not agreeing with what he's saying. And the whole time my son was in the bedroom, sleep in the bed with me. And I'm thinking I have to get out of this situation. So my way of kind of coercing him to let me out of the living room was, let me go in the kitchen and get some ice for my face. And my lip, you know, my mouth was bleeding. So he let me go in the kitchen. Which I was at the refrigerator getting ice, and my door is maybe like 2 feet away from my refrigerator. So I'm thinking at this point I had never been in any type of, you know, domestic, physical, anything with any other relationships prior, so it was scary. So I felt like he was going to kill me. I didn't know what to do, and I went back and forth because I didn't want to leave and run out. I was in the house. And when you're dealing with somebody, you love them, you're not thinking that they would do the things that they would do to you. So I'm thinking, okay, I don't want to leave my baby in here because what if he snaps and does something to my child if I leave out? So I went back and forth in my head, and this is all, it seems like, you know, it's 10 minutes, but it's literally 2 minutes, you know, as I'm standing in front of my refrigerator. So I decided I got to run out. I got to get out of the house and try to get help. So I ran out the door. Shortly after I made it maybe 10 to 15 feet, he grabbed me and was dragging me back in the house. And that was at that point, I'm like, I know if he get me back in the house, he is going to kill me. At that point, I thought I was running out, screaming to the top of my lungs, which I probably wasn't yelling as loud as I thought I was because I was had been choked. So he got me almost back into the home, and I'm kicking and I'm fighting, and you're not gonna get me back into the house. So at that point, when he's trying to drag me back in, he pulled my nightgown off. I was completely naked outside of my home at about 3 o'clock in the morning. I was embarrassed, but I still knew I couldn't go back in the house with him. So I stood there and I covered myself up the best way I can. And at that point, I think he kind of snapped back into reality and realized what he was doing. So he dropped his knees and was crying and begging and pleading for me to just go back in the house and talk to him. He threw me my nightgown. I told him just to get away from me, to please go. And at that point, I put my nightgown back on, and I saw a car running up the street. So I ran to the street and flagged the car down and asked the lady, can she call the police? She called the police. As I turned to look at my house. He had ran back in the house. He grabbed my laptop and he grabbed his car keys and he was coming back out and he pulled off and left. I went in the house and got my baby, then went to my mom. She stays like 2 streets away from me. So, you know, went over there. We called the police again. I couldn't go to work because my face was so swollen. My face was messed up. At the time I was teaching. So, you know, I mean, it's not like I'm on the phone working, you know, so I couldn't go to work like that. So I called the principal. I had talked to her. She was telling me, you know, she was very supportive.
Hey, Mishka, let's take a pause.
Okay.
You can gather yourself. So I just wanted to kind of touch base on some of the things that Mishka mentioned. As you heard, she had never been exposed to any of this prior to that. She was just breaking up with a guy. And, you know, she thought this was going to be a normal conversation, and we could see how quickly things can change. And so that's one of the things that I just want to kind of remind people who've been a victim of domestic violence at any time, for any reason. It's not always a buildup, you know. I think all of the ladies in the room could probably agree that we've been in a relationship even before it got physical. There was definitely verbal abuse, being called out of our names, and it becomes so much the norm, you know, that we don't think of that as a red flag or as something that is like a preface, you know, for something worse to happen. It has become very normal and regular to talk to our partners in a disrespectful way. And again, it's just that red flag that I encourage you, if you're in a relationship and you and your partner is referring to you out of your name, out of anger, that's something to pay attention to. That is definitely something that can end deadly for you or for your family. So I encourage you again to just pay attention to those little things. We'll be identifying red flags through the podcast, and so I just want you guys all to pay attention to that. It's incredibly, incredibly important. Mishka, are you okay to continue?
Yes.
Okay.
So I called the police. They came out, did the order of protection. I believe the following day. I think this was like over the weekend, so I had to wait until Monday.
Mm-hmm.
I did that, filed the order of protection. Time went on, maybe like a few days, a week, and it was around spring break because I was off of school. And one of my friends was getting married, so I'm getting ready for her wedding that day. It was a joyous day. It was such a wonderful day. I go to the wedding. A friend of mine and myself, we come home. I drop her off. I come home. And as I'm going into my laundry room to change into my pajamas, the door opened, my laundry room door. And it was him. And between that week from the first incident to that incident, you know, he had tried to call, he had tried to text, and I just was over it. I don't want anything to do with you. I'm done with you. So it was no engagement. You know, I told him I didn't want anything to do with him. So when he's in my house after I've got locks changed, because he did have a key initially. We had been in a relationship for 5 years. So I had got the locks changed. It was no broken windows. It was nothing. I don't know how he got in my home. Of course, he broke in, but I don't know how he got in my home. So I was startled. You know, I'm scared. I'm asking, why are you here? Can you just leave? Please, if you leave, I won't call the police. So at this point, it's like he's mad. He wants to know why I haven't answered his phone calls. It's not over with until he tells me it's over. So once again, he jumped on me. He attacked me. He punched me with a closed fist and straddled me, and I fell back in my living room. I was punched in my face multiple times. When I fell back, one of the mirrors or like pictures on my wall broke my fall. I fell on that, so it was glass everywhere. He had glass in his fist as he's punching me in my face. At that point, he got tired, so he got up and threw me a T-shirt that was on the living room floor and told me to clean myself up. I'm just at that point begging him to leave because he was maybe about 6'4", 6'5", close to 300 pounds, so he's a big guy. And, you know, I wasn't fighting him. I wasn't trying to fight him. I'm just begging him to leave, asking him to leave. So as I'm thinking he's leaving, you know, I'm following him through my kitchen because I'm thinking he's going to go out the door. He grabbed me again. He threw me into the back room. Well, I fell through the door in my the laundry room door, and my baby's high chair was back there, so that broke my fall. He picked me up by my hair. At the time I had braids, so he pulled out like 2 big plugs in the front when he picked me up off the ground by my head and threw me into the kitchen, where he proceeded to continue to tell me, you know, I wasn't going to leave him. And then he started kicking me. He tried to kick me in my face, and I covered my face up. And as I was covering my face up, he was kicking me. And then I was just in a fetal position on the floor in my kitchen and just begging him to leave. I guess once he got tired, he went to the door and he said, you know, he was still mad at me. I was a stupid bitch, and he was going to get his gun. And at that point, I like crawled to the door. He left out. I crawled to the door behind him, locked the door, called my mother, called the police again. The ambulance came, went to the hospital. They found glass in my back. I had to get maybe, I think, 8 to 10 stitches in my back. I had a spiral fracture in my hand, so I had to have surgery on my hand and get pins put in my hand. I had to wear a cast for a while. And at that time, it was hard because my baby was still in Pampers, so I couldn't even pick him up at the time to change his diaper because I only had one hand.
You guys, this is real. This is heartfelt truth that we're letting out, and the tears are real. So we apologize, but this is what it looks like, and reliving this is hard.
When I was in the emergency room, he called me, still threatening me, and it was my fault. You know, look what I made him do. I had him on speaker, so the one of the officers was actually in the room, so he was able to write that in the report because he heard him. I haven't had any contact with him. To this day, I do not communicate with him. Like I said in the beginning, my son does not know him.
Hey, Mishka.
Mm-hmm.
So you went to the hospital, and they did whatever they could to take care of you at the moment. What happened with the police and the case? Since he lives in Illinois, or he lived in Illinois at the time, they said that they would have to extradite him and go through that process, and since go across state lines, they would need like the sheriff or something, they told me, which literally was like 3-4 months before he actually was picked up at his job. And once he was, the police picked him up from his job, he was in Illinois for maybe like 2 or 3 weeks. Then they brought him back to Indiana, where he was maybe like in for a month, because it was about a month or so. They called me and let me know that he had first he asked for a bond reduction. So I went to the bond reduction hearing and testified as to why his bond shouldn't be reduced. They denied that, so they didn't give him the bond reduction. So he posted the $10,000, and he got out. And for a year, we went back and forth. And they eventually gave him work release. Okay. He didn't serve any time after that. All right. So the work release. Now, we know that there's certain laws tied to the work release, especially in the state of Indiana. Did you want to share what a couple of those were?
Yeah. As I was looking, because I just felt like it was not fair, you know, that he didn't do any time after that. Some of the criteria for the Lake County work release for the men is you have to have strong ties to the community, which he didn't because he was from a whole nother state. You have to be a nonviolent offender. Clearly, it was a violent offense. And it was some other things I can't remember offhand, but I know those two to me are the biggest like red flags, because he wasn't from the same community and it was clearly a violent offense, you know. And my thing, that what I did try to share with the court, is that I didn't feel safe at the time if he was coming back and forth from Illinois, Lake County, or Crown Point, from Illinois to Crown Point daily, and he's coming past my home every day. Even if it's not specifically riding down my street, he's coming past my exit where I live every day. So I'm supposed to feel safe, and I didn't, you know. So that was one of the things that I felt was kind of like a slap in the face.
So how do you think, now, you know, this happened in 2011, so it's been almost 7 years. Mm-hmm. How do you feel now as somebody who's been through it and somebody who has survived it? what have you done for yourself to do self-care? What have you done to help get yourself from the victim mindset to the survivor mindset? Has propelled you to overcome and to heal from this?
I think a lot of what I do day to day, as far as like a case manager and me helping my clients, and a lot of clients that I've had in the past have went through different domestic incidents, and just talking with them and helping them and trying to push them to get the support that they need and to leave certain situations, and me just talking to them, it helps me.
Do you share your story?
I do.
Good.
I do. I may not go through all the details, but I do. And I think just within my profession, a lot of times it's easier for a person to connect with you when they can look at you as a real person and not just somebody coming in to help me do this or tell me what to do, you know. So I try to be as real as I can and reason with them and share different things that I've experienced.
Well, Mishka, we are so happy that you have shared your story with us, and thank you for being vulnerable and allowing us to see this deeper side of who you are, and we'll talk more as the podcast goes on, but thank you for sharing your story, Mishka.
No problem.
I love you.
I love you too.
Okay.
You are listening to The Bill Moran Show on WVLP LP 103.1 FM and streaming live at WVLP.org or on your TuneIn app. We are broadcasting live from the historic 1 Center Street building in beautiful Valparaiso, Indiana. The Bill Moran Show is underwritten by Recovery Works of... If you or a loved one are struggling with a drug or alcohol problem, please call us at 866-535-4673. Now, back to your host, Bill Moran.
And as we continue to share stories, survivor stories, you know, I want to touch base on just a few things about my own. You know, my abuser was somebody with a history of mental health issues. And there's a genetic predisposition for people who experience mental health. It's not one of those things that just usually come out of nowhere. Everybody has some genetic predisposition. Sometimes it just takes a while to awaken it, and usually a trauma is something that works. You know, I think about the abuse that I experienced at the hands of my son's father, and the damage that it's done not only to me, you know, on the mental health side, but also to my children. You know, I have suffered ever since from anxiety and depression, and, you know, I have battled that. You know, I constantly live in fear. You know, when I do see him, and I have, you know, when I do see him, it literally stirs up every emotion, and it puts me in a bout of PTSD that could last for months. You know, my son, if he sees his father, he goes through the PTSD as well. One thing we have to remember in these situations is if your children witness the violence, your children are going to have a negative impact from it. You know, my 16-year-old who was on the receiving end of some of the blows from my son's father, from his brother's father, he talks about it still. And, you know, perfect example, he was at school a couple weeks ago, and him and a girl had gotten into an argument, you know, teenagers, and, you know, I think they were talking at some point, and whatever, something went awry, and the girl was, you know, spreading gossip about my son, and he made some comments in the classroom. And one of them was, "I'll slap you." This is something my 16-year-old said to this girl. And so when I get the phone call, I'm livid. You know, he knows what we've been through, and he knows what he's seen and what he's experienced firsthand. And the fact that he made the threat was something that had to be addressed. And we sat down and we had a conversation. He's like, "Mom, you know I never hit a girl." I said, "But saying it is just as bad as doing it." So we want to get ourselves out of that place where we're comfortable with just saying, "I'll slap you," or, you know, being aggressive towards a female, or really towards anybody. The violence is one of those things, even among peers, both boys and girls and all that. It just sometimes we need to just hunker down as parents and tell our kids, like, this is absolutely unacceptable. So that's just one of the things I want to talk about. But, you know, with Donnell, my son, you know, he's 14 and he's been in a residential placement for 2 years and suffering from mental health issues since he was 4. What got him in treatment was he hit a 5-year-old girl and knocked out her teeth. and it was over a pencil, something as menial as a pencil. But his brain is just hardwired to deal with things differently. You know, he doesn't know how to have the self-control to like make the right choice, and so we fight for our kids. One of the things that my non-for-profit is really focusing on is the early childhood traumas, and that could be just simple as witnessing abuse. That could be child molestation, which is something we'll talk about. And witnessing violence, and we really need to just, our goal is to really take all of those traumas starting at the very youngest and working through that, and then working on to the next trauma and the next trauma. And our goal is to really minimize the exposure that these young people get to these traumas, by making it known to anybody who's listening and anybody who's paying attention that these are all things that are terrifying. And I'm probably going all over the place right now because I'm like so overwhelmed with this. But so with the mental health aspect of how it ties to domestic violence and other early traumas, I'm going to go to Vicki. Vicki's story is one where there's definitely mental health issues attached, and her story is much different than Mishka's, in that this was an abuse that took that lasted over years. She had 3 children with her abuser, and so she is going to share a little bit of her story. Vicki, you ready to go?
Hi. Hello.
Hello.
It's kind of hard because I don't discuss what happened. I kind of just put it out my mind and try not to deal with it. My abuse started at 19. I had a 1-year-old daughter. I was in college, and I thought I found the man of my dreams. I thought this man was everything that it was going to get me out of this situation I was already in. I had came from being around domestic violence. I had been molested by a teacher, raped by a boyfriend, so I was just like, yeah, let's go. It didn't really work the way I thought it was going to. He was 26, and he used my vulnerability and manipulated my feelings for his own evil use. He wasted no time at all getting me pregnant, and he knew that my desire to have a 2-parent household outweighed whatever he was doing to me, because I didn't want my kids to grow up and their dad was in one house and we were in one house. Right after I found out I was pregnant with our son, the abuse started. At first it was just name calling and pushing and yelling over small stuff like maybe food, or the shirts weren't folded the right way, or the socks weren't put together in the right manner. I had my son July of 2004, and that's when the abuse started. Full-on abuse started, hair pulling, sexual assault, all of that. 6 months after I had our son, I was pregnant with our daughter. I tried to leave, but he wouldn't allow it. At that point, my family had turned their backs on me. They were like, that's what you're going to deal with. We don't want, anything to do with you. I had my daughter in October of 2005. I let him convince me to move to Michigan City in 2007. I had no family, no friends. I knew nothing about Michigan. At that point, I decided that something had to give. So I went to school to make myself better so that I could get us out this situation. When my children's father realized that I had a plan, the abuse got worse. But I refused to stop going to school. I went to school with black eyes. I went to school with broken ribs. I went to school with broken noses. I went to school with plugs missing out of my hair because I wanted to leave him. He would leave knowing I had no sitter for me to go to school. He did everything he could to deter my plan until one day I snapped. And the reason that I snapped is because the abuse went from me to my children. He threw my 2-year-old daughter into a wall because she was crying. Before I knew it, I blacked out. We were arguing in the living room. I had a knife in the drawer. And I went in the drawer to get the box cutter. And when he swung, I swung. He missed this time. I didn't. I went to jail for 36 hours for defending me and my children. I had to take domestic violence classes. I had to take anger management classes. All because I was tired of being hit.
And Vicky, what happened to him?
Nothing. He didn't have to take classes. He didn't have to take anger management. He didn't have to do anything. Everything was my fault. So I suffered the consequences. I got out of jail. I continued to go to school.
Vicky.
I continued, and the abuse continued. The only reason
Up in the microphone.
the only reason that I was,
Oh.
the only thing that kept me out of prison was that I had a 4.5-year paper trail on this man and the abuse. That's the only reason I'm not locked up now. The abuse still didn't stop, even after I stabbed him. By August of 2008, I was pregnant again with our youngest son. And that day I asked God, please take us out this situation. I don't want my baby to grow up like his sisters and brother had to. In November of 2008, I lost my dad. And my abuser knew that was the only protection that I had, was my daddy. When my dad died, he knew that it was nobody else to run to. It was nobody else to call. It was nobody else to help. And I wasn't working. He made sure that every job I had, I lost. So I couldn't just up and move. In May of 2009, we had our youngest son. And I was still praying. And I was still asking God to remove me any way he could. In August of 2009, God heard my cry. And I got a phone call sitting in class that he had been arrested. It was not for the abuse. It was not for any of the times he had put his hands on me. It was for something else. But that was the only way I was going to get out and live. Even now, 10 years later, he finds ways to bother me. He finds ways to stalk me. I've changed my number. I've blocked him on every social media I can. And he still finds ways. The only reason he's not physically trying to find a way to get to me is because of my husband. But he's still seeing threats. He's still seeing shots. It's to the point where I keep my children away from their grandparents because of this man. I keep my kids away from their families because of this man. My youngest son, I thank God every day that he doesn't know him. He doesn't know anything about him. He's never been around him because I refuse to allow that. But my oldest son shows the mental... My oldest son shows that the effects of what happened when he goes to school, when he's at home, he shows it. Because he went through it too. And all he heard was, this is how you treat women. And for the last 10 years, I've been trying to change the way my son thinks. Because he really believes that women can't make it in this world without a man telling them what to do. He really believes that men are supposed to control women and that you can talk to a woman any kind of way because this is what his dad was telling him.
Right.
I also blame myself a lot because I feel like, how did I allow myself to get in this situation? How did I allow myself to let somebody beat me for 7.5 years? Sometimes I still blame myself. Okay,
so let's talk about that, right? So victim blaming is probably the biggest statistic. I mean, not a statistic. It's probably one of the biggest problems associated with domestic violence is we try to internalize and make sense of what has happened and, make sense of what's happened and then find a way, like, what did I do wrong? Why did this happen to me? And what could I have done differently? Here's the thing. It doesn't know any color. It doesn't know any social status. It doesn't know any of that. When a man puts his hands on a woman or vice versa, because like we've talked about before, domestic violence does go both ways. When there is an incident of domestic violence, we don't always know what to do. The resources aren't always there. And that's one of the things that we have to understand, that victim blaming is something that we do on accident. We don't even realize we do it to ourselves. You know, for all of these years that I've been through it, that Mishka's been through it, that you've been through it, that Callie's been through her own traumas, we all sat and tried to internalize, why did I allow this to happen to me? Once we start changing the way that we speak about it, once we start changing the language that's associated with domestic violence and trauma in general, really that is what's going to, I think, change the overall landscape of what domestic violence and other traumas against women look like. You are not to blame. There is nothing, Vicki, that you've done wrong. There is absolutely nothing that you could have done to prevent this. If a man is going to be an abuser, a man's going to be an abuser, and there is absolutely nothing any of us can do to change that. What needs to happen is the laws need to become more strict. One of the things I just picked up on was an average prison sentence for a man who kills their female partner in a domestic violence situation. They get on average 2 to 6 years in prison. An average prison sentence for a woman who killed their male partners, 15 years. 2 to 6 years for a man who kills a woman in a domestic violence related situation. But if she kills him, it's 15 years. This despite the fact that most women who kill their partners do so to protect themselves from violence initiated by that partner. These women aren't violent unless someone is choking them or trying to kill them. And look at the disparity, 2 to 6 years for a man and 15 years for a woman. The thing that we need to remember is it is dangerous to leave. It's dangerous to stay. It's dangerous to fight back, right? There's always going to be more danger for women than for men in that regard. Women don't have the strength that men have. And our systems have literally allowed us to become so conditioned to this being a normal behavior that we don't know how to use our voices to stand up and change. But it's going to start with us changing the way we look at ourselves, right? On average, a woman goes back to an abusive partner 7 times before they finally walk away, or before it ends in a violent death, right? So we look at this and we say, okay, I went back 3 times. Vicki went back 6 times. Mishka left after the first time. Do you see how the wide disparity of the situations, but they're all so similar but so different? And we just need to be able to change the way that we talk about it. We need to be proud of the fact that we have survived this. None of us in this room are victims anymore. I don't care how you slice it or dice it, guys. We've survived this, right? Here it is all these years later. You know, I have a 14-year-old son. It's been 14 years. And while I still think about things and I've done differently, I just fell in love with the wrong guy. Vicki fell in love with the wrong guy. Mishka fell in love with the wrong guy, right? We have to understand that this is something that we every day have to fight and remind ourselves that I did not cause this. There's nothing that I fell in love with the wrong guy. And now what I can do is change everything about who I am and what I say and how I go about things. And I'm going to change the landscape of what domestic violence and sexual assault and child molestation and trauma against women and men looks like. And so you guys, Mishka and Vicki, using your voice and sharing your story and showing the disparities and being vulnerable, we appreciate that. And this is only going to help to inspire others to be more vocal about their stories. When we talk about it, it's no longer a secret. When you talk about it, you go from victim to survivor. So both of you, if you didn't know you were a survivor before today, you are now. And I'm proud of you guys. I'm proud to know you, and I'm proud to love you both. And I thank you guys for doing this. And I want you guys to continue to share your story. I want you guys to get out there. I want you to put it on social media. Don't be ashamed. You've done nothing wrong. People are going to always have an opinion, and the shaming is going to be one of those things that we cannot change. But what you can do is you can change one person at a time. My story inspired you to share yours, Vicki. My story inspired you to share yours. Imagine what's going to happen when you walk out of here today and somebody hears this aired in a week or 2 from now. And they're like, wow, that's Mishka. I know Mishka. And then they come to you and say, Mishka, I got to tell you something. And then you just open another woman to go from victim to survivor. Mm-hmm. And it's really a domino effect. We have this ability to do that. Bill, we thank you for giving us this opportunity to share these stories and to inspire others to be comfortable in who they are. Nobody who is listening to this, if you've been through this, we don't blame you. You are okay. You are strong. You are beautiful. You are powerful. And you are a survivor. Remember that. I'm so proud of this and what impact it's going to have. And A little bit about Dimensions of Intersections, my non-for-profit. This is one of the things that we're pushing for so hard, is changing the language that we speak, right? Knowing that nothing that happened to you, right? A lot of people who get in violent relationships usually have some kind of early childhood trauma. We talked about that. Child molestation, especially if it goes unaddressed and you never get that justice, it starts to change how you view yourself. And you view yourself as, I deserve to get molested when I was 4 or when I was 9 in Vicky's case. And then you continue to move on, and then you get raped at 16 or, 17. For me, I think I was 17 too, and I didn't tell anybody. Did you? No. So we don't no, right? Okay. So we don't talk about these things, but then you look at all of these terrible things that you've gone through, and then you find yourself in an abusive relationship, and you sit back and you wonder, how the hell did this happen? Well, look at your past. Had somebody helped you when you were 9 and were molested, Vicky, do you think that you would have been maybe raped, or maybe the landscape could have changed?
I think if I would have got the help, then I probably would not have been in the situations that I was in. But I think my mindset was so messed up because I didn't get the help, and it was a teacher at my school, somebody that I was supposed to be able to trust, and I wasn't. And I think that's what it just spiraled out of control after that. It just was like, well, nobody else cared. Because
we sit back and we think, like, nobody cared about me enough to do what I needed them to do to take care of me. So why should I care about myself? Exactly. And then we just fall in love with these people that are unhealthy, Again, it doesn't have to be that way. We need to, again, change the way that we talk about it. We need to be more open about it. We need to talk about the lasting effects. Mental health is a big part of this. When you suffer from anxiety and depression, and especially PTSD, it's so easy to get yourself right back in a bad relationship again. I did it, with my ex-husband. Like, I knew it was an unhealthy relationship from the door. Like, he opened the door and I saw unhealthy everything. And I stayed with him anyway. You're at a charity event being honored as a survivor of domestic violence, an advocate, somebody who's used their voice. And he gets drunk and beats you in the hotel room that night. Like, and imagine you know what I did the next day? I apologized to him. Because why? This was my fault. I drank too much. I was careless in the way that I was behaving. I absolutely deserved that. And I think back on it now and I'm like, no, I did not. I look at my kids and I look at the things that they've witnessed and they've experienced, and you want to protect your kids, but you don't know how. And then the mental health aspects, like I said, there's a predisposition. And when something awakens that in those children, you have to do something to fight for your kids. And so we all have to look at our lives now and how far we've come. And all of us in this room, like I said, are survivors. Look at those kids and fight for your kids. Teach your kids to be better, right? Don't ever let them think that a man controlling a woman is acceptable. We're not in the 1950s and 40s anymore. And that was considered normal then, but it wasn't even normal then. That's an unhealthy thing. My grandmother was a victim of domestic violence for 15.
So was my grandmother.
Married at 15, and she went through that, right? And he abused the mess out of my grandma, And then my mom was in that same cycle, and then I'm in that same cycle, and I pray to God every day that my kids don't wrap themselves up in that cycle. That's why I push so hard. But with that being said, the system is still designed to see survivors not be survivors, and to see the people who are perpetrating the violence against us, they're giving them a free pass over and over again, and they just continue to grow and are able to abuse more people and harm more people.
While we're being left out by ourselves. And then it's, well, what did you do? Or why it's your fault. No, it's his fault. He has no control. And you guys are saying, but it's okay because whatever she did, we're going to give you a slap on the wrist because it was her fault. She caused it. She made you act like that. And no, that's not fair. And it's not right. And that's probably why most DV victims stay victims and they don't get the help, because you feel like, well, if the police is saying what you do, that's what everybody's going to say.
Or they get blamed for staying.
Right.
It's your fault because you stayed so long, or
why
did you stay?
Most women die trying to leave. They don't die being in the relationship. They die trying to leave their abusers.
Yes. So just a couple things as we're getting ready to wrap up. We talked earlier about some red flags, right? And we talked about your partner calling you out of your name, that usually is some kind of sign that I would pay close attention to, right? So being called a bitch or other expletives, which I won't go, we all know what they are. So I just wanted to give you guys a couple red flags to look for if you are in an abusive relationship, or if you think you might be or you is. So I'll ask a few of these questions, and these are questions I want you to ask yourself. Does your partner expect you to spend all of your time with him, or to check in with him and let him know where you are and who you're with? For me, my ex-husband did just that. I couldn't go to the bathroom without my phone. If I was going to lunch with a girlfriend, he needed to hear her voice before I could hang up. I lost friendships. I lost my business that I had. I went through all that because I had to check in constantly, right? So that's definitely a red flag. Does your partner act extremely jealous or possessive of you? Ties right into that number one thing that I just talked about, spending the time constantly. Does your partner isolate you by controlling where you go, who you see, who you talk to, and what you wear? Does your partner treat you with disrespect and put you down? Does your partner put down your friends and family, your dreams, ideas, and goals? As Vicki talked about, he did everything he could to stop her from going to school, right? Yeah. So those, again, it's a red flag, and we see it, and sometimes we just don't recognize it. Does your partner lose his temper frequently over little things? Does he make you feel as if you're walking on eggshells to keep the peace? Does he make threats to hurt you, leave you, hurt your pets, destroy your property, or commit suicide if you don't do what he wants? One of the things that prepped me to leave my ex-husband is when he put a shotgun to his chin in front of my son. I saw my son become a man that day. And I swear, and I'll say it 1,000 times, he used bad language, which I was not thrilled about. But what he did is he stood there and he stood up for his mom. That's how I knew that my son was listening to what I had been saying all these years. And I saw him become a man because he protected me. My son protected me when my husband could not. So again, it's another thing to pay attention to. Does your partner play mind games or make you feel guilty about things? And it could be something just as guilty as, dinner, or not doing the laundry, or not cleaning up the house. Like, I work all day and you couldn't even do this. Like, and you sit and you wonder, like, I work too, and I have to raise kids, and I have to do all these things. So don't make me feel guilty. So if he makes you feel guilty, that's a red flag. And the last, responsibility for his actions. Does he blame you, drugs, or alcohol, his boss, parents, etc., for his behavior? An abuser is an abuser. There's no way around it. Drugs, yes, of course that heightens it. Being an alcoholic, of course that heightens it. Having a bad upbringing definitely enhances the chances of that person becoming an abuser and you becoming a victim. Or you being exposed to that kind of violence does the same thing. So I want you guys all to think about those questions. And if any of those ring a red flag or bring up some ill emotion, that means that you're in an unhealthy relationship. With that being said, there's a national domestic violence hotline that I encourage anybody who thinks they're in an abusive relationship to call. The number is 1-800-799-7233. You can also go to their website at www.thehotline.org. Or if you're in immediate danger, call 911. That's obviously the best avenue I can take. I can give you. But remember, you're not alone. There's so many of us that have been down this road, and we just want to see anybody who's in these situations become a survivor and no longer a victim. If you need it, Dimensions of Intersections, my non-for-profit, is going to start offering services later on this year, or early in 2018. And when we do that, I would be absolutely open to you can visit our website at www.dimensionsofintersections.org, or you can reach out to me on social media. I have a page for Dimensions of Intersections as well. But really, there's so much more to talk about, and there's so many things that we can still discuss about this. I think our next time I'd like to talk about the cultural norms in various ethnicities and groups. One of the things I'll just mention real quick before we wrap up is Vicki mentioned wanting to keep her family together. She has 3 children with this man, and she wants to keep her family together. But it's because it's pushed so badly that in the African-American community that homes are broken and that they're single-parent homes. And we want to see our families strive and thrive and be successful. But when that can't happen because of this, you need to be okay with walking away. It's pushed. Black families have to stay together. And I think ideally that would be a perfect thing. And yes, keeping our families together, and not just African American families, but also any race of families in the family dynamic. We want to keep our families together, but at what cost? So at this point, I think that what we need to do is know this is unhealthy and walk away.
Is it more of a hindrance or a help with them being there?
Right.
That was my outlook.
What are you exposing your children to by staying?
Exactly. You have to weigh your options, because they see everything. And that was my biggest thing.
They definitely do. And I just thank God that I was able to get my youngest son and my youngest daughter out before they ever was able to really experience, because my youngest daughter, she was 3 when I left, So she really didn't get to see it. But my oldest 2 kids did. Thankfully, my oldest daughter has her own dad. So we were able to get her, the help. And she knows that that's not normal. That's not love. We're working on the oldest boy. We're going to get him together and let him know that that's not what you do. But I do thank God every day that he covered my youngest 2. And my youngest 2 will never, ever have to know what that is.
And single-family households are a norm in the U.S. especially. But there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with being a mom, raising your kids, as long as your kids are healthy and you're healthy and you're showing them that, like, you can fight and you can do anything you want and you can be successful in spite of what you've been through, right? I look at Mishka, and I've known Mishka for almost 10 years too. And I remember where you were back in the day when I met you. I think it was like 2007, 2008. Same with Vicky. It was 10 years ago. And I've watched how both of you have grown and really turned into these things in your communities and with your families. And, Mishka is giving back. And we're so proud of you, and I'm so proud of you. And I know anybody who listens is going to be proud of you too. And Vicky, I know where you've come from. I've seen this girl in the gutter, and I've watched her grow up into a beautiful mom and a fantastic partner. And she's lucky enough to have a fantastic partner who is encouraging her. And he was the one who was really supportive of her coming on and doing the show today.
He was. He was like, babe, you need to talk about this. You need to let somebody else know that it's hard, but you can do it. You can do it. I had 3 kids and a newborn when I got out this situation, and I never looked back, and I refused to.
I remember this. I remember this girl living in Michigan City in an unhealthy relationship, and now I look at her and I'm like, look at my boo. And then I look at Michigan, I'm like, look at my boo. So thank you, ladies.
The inspiration for me to leave.
Thank you.
I don't know how many times I called Brianne crying, I got to go. I don't know how I'm gonna do it, Bri, but I got to get out of here. And she would always say, you can do it. You can do it. If you need me, call me. You can do it. And I thank you for always being there.
You're most welcome. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Bill, again, for bringing this and allowing us to continue this discussion. And I'm looking forward to having more of these.
Thank you, Brianne, and thank you to our panelists. We would like to thank Porter County Sheriff David Reynolds for providing a safe place for our panelists to meet. This is the close of our first panel discussion. Please stay tuned for information regarding future panel discussions on this topic. We would like to thank you for tuning in today. This is Bill Moran of The Bill Moran Show wishing you a safe week. Goodbye for now.
You have been listening to The Bill Moran Show on WVLP LP 103.1 FM and streaming live at WVLP.org or on your TuneIn app. Broadcast live from the historic 1 Center Street building in beautiful Valparaiso, Indiana. The Bill Moran Show is underwritten by Recovery Works of Maryville, Indiana. If you or a loved one are struggling with a drug or alcohol problem, please call us at 866-535-4673. This show will be rebroadcast on Saturday at 4 o'clock p.m. on WVLP. The Bill Moran Show podcast is available on iTunes and YouTube. Have a wonderful week. Bye for now.